Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're kicking off with a question that sounds, well, pretty simple on the surface. What organization is actually behind things like the internet, GPS, and even stealth technology?
Yeah, and you might rattle off a few big tech names, maybe some government agencies.
Exactly. But here's the thing. These are achievements from decades ago, and that points to a much deeper, more secretive history, one that, as we'll get into, definitely raises some, let's say, Orwellian questions for some people.
Indeed. So this deep dive is all about DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. You could argue it's the most powerful, certainly the most productive military science agency globally.
And yet,
But-
and yet hardly anyone really digs into it.
Right. Its core mission, right from the start, has always been about creating revolutions in military science, making sure the United States stays technologically dominant.
Okay, but when you think government agency, you usually think bureaucracy, red tape. How is DARPA structured differently? What makes it so, well, effective for cutting-edge research?
That's a really key question because it is genuinely unique.
Sure.
DARPA isn't some huge, sprawling organization. It actually runs on a remarkably small staff, usually around 120 program managers. They typically stay for about 5 years.
So they're not doing the lab work themselves?
No, not directly. Think of them more like venture capitalists, but for defense tech. They find promising ideas, then they hire external contractors, academics, universities, defense firms, even other government labs to actually build things.
And then they hand it off.
Exactly. If it works, they transition it quickly to the military services. It's incredibly agile, relatively free from standard bureaucracy, and it's all funded by an annual budget of roughly $3 billion.
$3 billion. So if DARPA is the engine identifying these revolutions, what's our goal today? What are we trying to unpack for you, the listener?
Well, our mission today is really to uncover the story of DARPA. It's compelling, fascinating, sometimes a bit unsettling. We want to trace it from its origins, look at its huge impact warfare technology, and really try to understand what goes on behind the headlines.
Pulling out those key insights.
Precisely, giving you the context.
All right, let's get into it. Starting right back at the beginning, the Cold War. 1957. The Soviets launch Sputnik.
Yeah, and that sent absolute shockwaves through the U.S. establishment. A profound fear, really, of being technologically surprised, falling behind.
So President Eisenhower, with his military background, he sees this.
He sees it immediately. He recognized that jurisdictional disputes, as he put it, between the Army, Navy, Air Force, they were actually holding back progress. Too much infighting, fragmented efforts.
Right. So his response.
In 1958, he authorized $10 million, a decent sum back then, to create ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. That was its original name. The stated goal was, and I quote, single control in some of our most advanced development projects. Get everyone pulling in the same direction on the really big stuff.
But it wasn't exactly smooth sailing from day one, was it? You'd think national security would unite everyone, but...
Not quite. There was actually significant pushback from inside the system. The military branches themselves, Army, Navy, Air Force, they lobbied against ARPA. They were afraid of losing control, losing funding.
And even defense contractors?
Yes, even big ones like Monsanto, who, later became infamous for Agent Orange.
Yeah.
They initially opposed it too. Everyone wanted to protect their turf. Ernest Lawrence even suggested a whole different agency modeled on the Manhattan Project.
So getting the right leadership was crucial.
Absolutely critical. A real statement of intent. They chose Herb York. He was this brilliant physicist, only 36 years old, came up from humble beginnings.
And incredibly, there was another candidate considered.
Yeah, quite surprisingly, Werner von Braun.
Mm-hmm.
He was famous then, just launched the Explorer I satellite. A huge public figure.
But
He was rejected. His past as an SS officer in Nazi Germany, his direct involvement with slave labor at the Nordhausen rocket factory, was undeniable. So choosing York sort of set an early, albeit maybe faint, ethical boundary for ARPA.
York moves into his Pentagon office, March 58, and he hangs up this photo of the moon.
Right, a big framed photo. But next to it, he hangs an empty frame.
Why empty?
Visitors would ask, and he'd say he was leaving it empty until ARPA developed a spacecraft that could take a picture of the backside of the moon. A pretty powerful symbol of just how ambitious they were right from the get-go. Phenomenal aspirations.
And this ambition was set against a backdrop of just, well, terrifying nuclear realities and intense ethical debates.
Absolutely. You have to remember the context. In 1954, the U.S. tested the Castle Bravo hydrogen bomb in the Marshall Islands, 15 megatons, the largest nuclear fireball the world had ever seen.
And things went wrong.
Terribly wrong. An unexpected 90-degree wind shift pushed the fallout directly towards inhabited atolls, even some of the Navy task force ships. The air filled with this whitish chaff,
Mhm.
highly radioactive pulverized coral.
And the human cost was immediate. There was a Japanese fishing boat.
The Lucky Dragon number 5, Daigo Fukuryumaru. It was about 15 miles outside the official restricted zone, but still got caught. The fishermen saw this incredible light, thought the sun was rising in the west.
But it wasn't the sun.
No. By the time they got back to Japan, they were all suffering from severe radiation poisoning. 6 months later, the chief radio operator, Ikichi Kubayama, he died.
The true scale of this, though, wasn't fully grasped until later.
Right, until President Eisenhower himself was shown a top-secret map. They superimposed Castle Bravo's fallout pattern onto the U.S. East Coast.
And the result.
Utterly terrifying. A ground zero in D.C. would have killed everyone in the greater Washington-Baltimore area almost instantly. Half of New York City would have died by nightfall.
That must have been a sobering moment for Eisenhower.
Profoundly sobering. It showed him that traditional civil defense bunkers duck and cover. It was basically useless against thermonuclear war. It fundamentally shifted the focus towards deterrence, yes, but also towards finding truly revolutionary defense technologies, which of course became ARPA's mission.
And it showed those civilian bunkers were essentially a fantasy.
Apocryphal, as the book puts it. The men in the heavily shielded Station 70 bunker during Castle Bravo, even with 10,000 factor shielding, they were nearly fatally irradiated. It proved the point.
This devastation, it must have fueled the debate about the H-bomb itself.
Oh, absolutely. A fierce, very secret debate was raging. On one side, you had J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, chair of the Atomic Energy Commission's Advisory Committee. He led a unanimous opposition to the H-bomb. He argued its only real use was to, quote, slaughter a vast number of civilians. He saw it as a weapon of genocide.
But there were strong proponents, too.
Yes, figures like Ernest Lawrence and Louis Strauss, they argued it was absolutely essential for national survival, especially against what they called a government of atheists, the Soviet Union.
And the consequences for opposing the H-bomb were severe.
Extremely severe. Oppenheimer was stripped of his security clearance, banished from government service for life, effectively. It sent a very strong message to other scientists. Keep quiet. There was, as the source notes, little room for dissent and certainly not for objection on moral grounds. National security trumped ethical concerns.
Against this backdrop of huge stakes, nuclear fear, ethical clashes, a different kind of thinking was emerging, more strategic, focused on conflict itself.
Exactly. And one mind really stands out here, John von Neumann, Hungarian-American mathematician, physicist, polymath, just brilliant. Edward Teller called him mentally superhuman, a real superstar defense scientist.
And he was interested in games.
Obsessed with them, especially parlor games like poker. He saw them as being fundamentally about deception, about predicting your opponent's moves.
Which led to his theories.
Right. His 1926 paper, Theory of Parlor Games, introduced the minimax theorem. Basically a strategy to minimize your maximum potential losses while maximizing your minimum potential gains, finding the safest, best option.
And that caught the Pentagon's eye.
Absolutely. That paper, especially his later book, Theory of Games and Economic Behavior from 1944, it revolutionized economics. But the Pentagon saw its potential for modeling conflict, for strategic thinking.
But even von Neumann couldn't solve everything. There was this thing called the prisoner's dilemma.
Ah, yes. Posed by RAND analysts Merrill Flood and Melvin Drescher. It's a classic scenario, you probably know it. Two suspects arrested, offered deals to betray each other. It illustrates why rational individuals might not cooperate, even if it seems logical. Trust versus betrayal.
And von Neumann.
You could not solve it, in the sense that there wasn't a single, purely rational, best strategy, independent of assumptions about the other player. What was fascinating was how people actually played it. It revealed a lot about human nature, trust versus distrust.
And even political leanings.
Apparently, yes. Studies found conservatives tended to betray more often, while liberals tended to cooperate more, aiming for a better collective outcome. Interesting, huh?
Definitely. And von Neumann wasn't just thinking about games, he was thinking about computers, too.
Very early on, he saw computers like Maniac, which he helped design, as conscious models of the human brain. He believed they'd eventually be able to think, to outperform our own nervous systems by infinite orders of magnitude. Really foundational stuff for AI research.
So, as America is grappling with nuclear war, the civil defense plans seem totally inadequate after that Castle Bravo revelation.
Completely. That idea of everyone living underground after an attack. Eisenhower knew it was apocryphal. Station 70 proved even heavy shielding wasn't enough.
But there was a serious bunker built for the top leadership.
Oh, yes. The Raven Rock Mountain Complex, also known as Site R, a fully protected underground command center for the president and key staff, completed around that time.
And interestingly, designed with some help from former Nazi scientists.
That's right, brought over under Operation Paperclip. They had expertise in building underground structures, bunkers. It's a stark illustration of who the real protection was for.
And beyond the blast itself, what about survival after an attack? Food, resources.
Grim findings there, too. A committee looked into it. Radiation could penetrate tin cans. No electricity meant no refrigeration. Conditions would be, quote, filthy and miserable. This kind of reality check led to widespread public ridicule of the whole civil defense effort. It just seemed impossible.
Which pushed ARPA towards more radical ideas for defense.
Exactly. They needed something beyond bunkers. So in July 1958, they launched ARPA Study Number 1, codenamed Project 137, based at Fort McNair. The goal was to find those national security problems not now receiving adequate attention. Think outside the box.
And this led to some unusual concepts.
Definitely. Project 137 surfaced this idea from Nicholas Christopoulos. He was this self-taught genius, elevator technician originally. His idea was, well, epic, explode nuclear weapons in space to create an impenetrable shield of high-energy electrons over the U.S.
A nuclear shield in space.
Essentially, yeah. To zap incoming enemy warheads. It sounded like pure science fiction, and initially they thought it was impractical. But ARPA didn't forget it.
They actually tried it.
They did more than try it. Operation Argus. This was the only fully classified U.S. nuclear test series ever conducted. 3 nuclear weapons launched into space from a specially equipped ship, the USS Norton Sound, way out in the remote South Atlantic.
Wow. And the goal?
To test Christopoulos' theory. Could they create artificial radiation belts to disrupt the electronics of incoming missiles, mess with geomagnetic fields? It was an extraordinary secret undertaking.
Yeah.
4,500 military personnel, hundreds of scientists involved, a massive space experiment.
All driven by this incredibly tight timeline for a potential attack.
Exactly. This terrifyingly precise calculation ARPA scientists made for the Defender program, this ballistic missile defense. They figured out exactly how long a Soviet ICBM with a megaton warhead would take to get from launch to, say, Washington, D.C.
And the number was?
A mere 1,600 seconds.
1,600 seconds?
That's 26 minutes and 40 seconds. That's it. From launch to impact.
Gives you chills.
It does. They broke it down. 300 seconds for the boost phase, 1,200 seconds mid-course coasting through space, and then just 100 seconds of the terminal phase, re-entry and detonation. That calculation drove the desperate need for things like BMUWS, the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System.
Like those radar sites way up north.
Right, like JSITE, 900 miles from the North Pole. Eugene McManus worked there for RCA, running it under ARPA's program office. He described the job as 90% boredom and 10% panic, just waiting for the signal that meant those 1,600 seconds had started.
Okay, so the Cold War threat is existential, but then another kind of conflict emerges. Vietnam.
Right.
And ARPA gets involved there, too.
Yes, and in a very different way. William Godell, who was ARPA's Director of Policy and Planning, he observed that the war in Vietnam wasn't like previous conflicts. The Vietnamese were fighting what he called an asymmetrical, even irrational guerrilla war. It was heavily based on psychology, not just firepower.
So a shift in perspective for ARPA.
A big shift for Godell, anyway. He saw this as the future, and it changed how he thought ARPA should contribute.
Which led to Project Agile.
Exactly. Godell proposed Project Agile for ARPA to provide techniques and gadgets specifically tailored for the Vietnam conflict.
And gadgets included things like defoliants.
Yes, controversially. This included massive defoliation operations using chemicals like Agent Orange, Agent Pink, Agent Purple. Terrible long-term health consequences, as we now know. There was even Project Emote, which aimed to, believe it or not, create firestorms to burn down jungles after they'd been defoliated.
Did that work?
Early experiments like Operation Sherwood Forest mostly failed. Often because, well, it rained. Hard to start a firestorm in a monsoon.
Alongside these physical tools, there was this psychological dimension, this fear of brainwashing that was prevalent back then.
Oh, huge fear in the 1950s.
Huh.
Fueled by writers like Edward Hunter and psychologists like Joost Meerloo. They pushed this idea that communists were using drugs, hypnosis, sophisticated techniques to turn American soldiers into puppets.
And this wasn't just abstract fear, it hit close to home for some powerful people.
Very close. Alan Macy Dulles, son of Alan Dulles, the CIA director, his son, suffered a severe traumatic brain injury in the Korean War. It left him with permanent short-term amnesia, paranoia. His sister wrote about the awful personal toll, and how doctors often dismissed it as psychogenic, not physical trauma. A really tragic story.
Yet, ironically, this fear of brainwashing was something William Goodell actually leveraged.
He did, very skillfully. He managed the public narrative around captured American POWs from Korea, like Marine Colonel Frank Schwabel, who had signed confessions under duress. Goodell framed it as, the communists tried to brainwash our guys, but ultimately they failed. It reinforced this idea of American moral strength and resilience.
And that helped his career.
Absolutely. That narrative control was seen as a major success, and it definitely contributed to Godell's rise within the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Shows the power of shaping perception.
So with this focus on psychology and motivation, the RAND Corporation gets involved in Vietnam too.
Yes. RAND, already famous for nuclear strategy and game theory, they branched out under Project Agile. They started looking into persuasion and motivation techniques. The core questions were, who are these people, the Vietnamese? Why did some people embrace communism, trying to understand the enemy's mindset?
But their findings weren't always what the military wanted to hear.
Often not. RAND anthropologists like Hickey and Donald did studies on the Strategic Hamlet program, this plan to move villagers into fortified compounds. Their research found the villagers absolutely hated it. Forced relocation, economic hardship, social disruption.
And the military leadership
largely ignored it. General Paul Harkins, the U.S. commander, wasn't interested. Harold Brown, who was director of defense research and engineering then, famously just turned his chair to face the window when they tried to brief him. A complete dismissal. Shows that disconnect between field research and command decisions.
That local resentment boiled over sometimes, didn't it? Like the self-immolation.
A horrifying moment. Thich Quang Duc, this elderly Buddhist monk, setting himself on fire in a Saigon intersection in 1963. It became this incredibly powerful image, a real catalyst for the widespread anger against President Diem's regime, a visual representation of deep suffering and protest.
And those RAND anthropologists, they were right there in the thick of it.
Gerald Hickey, for example. He was embedded with special forces out in Nam Dong. He saw firsthand that ARPA's defoliants were making the local villagers sick, creating resentment, undermining the whole hearts and minds idea.
And he even got into combat.
Yeah, during a Viet Cong ambush on the camp, he ended up picking up a weapon and fighting alongside the Green Berets. It really blurred that line between academic observer and active participant.
RAND's work on Viet Cong motivation, was it influential?
It was certainly lucrative for RAND, but the influence is debatable. Some reports, like one by Zasloff and Donald, were quite blunt. They concluded the Viet Cong were a formidable foe and could only be defeated at enormous costs.
That probably wasn't popular.
No. Figures like Seymour Deichmann at the Institute for Defense Analyses, who oversaw some of this work, deemed such findings unhelpful. This led to researchers like Leon Goret, who tended to produce analyses more aligned with what the Pentagon wanted to hear, getting more prominence. Again, that pressure to shape research to fit policy goals.
Then there were the Jasons. Who were they?
The Jasons were, and still are, this elite group of academic scientists, mostly physicists, who advise the U.S. government, particularly the Pentagon, on national security matters. Think top-tier brains. Murph Goldberger co-founded the group, and RPA paid their consulting fees.
And they worked on some pretty advanced classified stuff.
Highly classified. Things like Project Seesaw, which explored directed energy weapons, basically. Lasers or particle beams like Buck Rogers' death rays, potentially for shooting down ICBMs. Way ahead of its time.
And they were involved in Vietnam, too, with that electronic fence idea.
Yes, the anti-infiltration barrier along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was conceived as a system of systems, fusing different sensor technologies, acoustic sensors like sonobuoys dropped from the air, seismic sensors planted in the ground, infrared detectors all networked together to listen for enemy movement.
The birth of automated surveillance on the battlefield.
Exactly. Gordon MacDonald, a key Jason member, called it the beginning of using unmanned sensors gathering tactical intelligence for managing munitions delivery. Sensors detect, computers analyze, weapons respond. The template for modern networked warfare.
And then there was the nuclear question related to the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
This is where it gets really startling. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara actually asked the Jasons to study whether tactical nuclear weapons could be used to block the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Seriously, nukes in Vietnam.
They produced a classified report titled Tactical Nuclear Weapons in Southeast Asia. When parts of it were eventually leaked, it caused absolute outrage. The fact that it was even being considered was shocking to many.
That must have put the Jasons in the spotlight.
Big time. They became targets for anti-war protesters, labeled war criminals. University connections to defense work, like the Jasons meeting place inside von Neumann Hall at Princeton, described as an ultra-secret think tank, were exposed. It created a huge backlash against academic involvement in the war effort.
And this backlash affected ARPA too.
Definitely. ARPA started looking into non-lethal weapons, maybe partly in response to domestic unrest as well as Vietnam. Research into ways to stop demonstrators without killing them.
Like what?
Things like poison darts, tranquilizer darts, something called photic driving, using strobe lights at certain frequencies to affect brain waves, disorient people, also temporary laser blindness, even skin-burning microwave beams. A whole range of crowd control tech.
And ARPA itself faced consequences.
Yes, the agency was sort of downgraded, forced to move out of the Pentagon building itself, across the river to Rosslyn, Virginia. It signaled a loss of status, a more precarious future. The director at the time, Eberhard Rechten, he talked about ARPA's fundamental chicken and egg problem.
What did he mean by that?
He meant ARPA needs to do pre-requirement research. They have to anticipate future threats and develop technologies before the military even knows it needs them. Because if you wait until there's a requirement, a known threat, it's often too late to start the research. You've already been surprised.
Like needing the anti-Sputnik tech before Sputnik launched.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a constant race against future surprises. They have to fund things that seem outlandish or unnecessary now because they might be crucial later.
Even supercomputers became controversial.
Right. The ELIAC V, this incredibly powerful supercomputer built at the University of Illinois by Daniel Slotnick, who was one of Neumann's students, it became a major target for anti-war protests on campus. It highlighted how deeply intertwined university research, computing power, and military objectives had become in the public mind.
So despite the controversies and the difficulties in Vietnam, that idea of the electronic fence, the sensor network, that concept survived.
Oh, absolutely. It laid the groundwork for what the book calls a fundamental transformation of the battlefield, moving away from relying solely on human patrols and towards using technology, sensors, networks to see and control the battle space.
After Vietnam, DARPA, they got the D for defense added back to their name in the 70s. What was their focus then?
They refocused back towards high-risk projects of revolutionary impact, more emphasis on hard science and hardware, essentially getting back to that core mission of preventing technological surprise like another Sputnik moment.
And we saw advancements in areas like night vision and stealth.
Big time. Night vision tech, which had early roots, really expanded. And stealth, the idea of making aircraft invisible to radar that was originally pushed by the CIA with the A-12 Oxcart spy plane. But DARPA picked it up later, funding Lockheed's pioneering work on stealth fighters and bombers. These weren't just small improvements. They changed the game.
And computing remained central.
Absolutely central. Stephen Lukasik, who became DARPA director, really pushed Command Controlling Communications C3. And C3 relied heavily on computers, which were getting exponentially more powerful thanks to Moore's Law.
Moore's Law, the doubling of microchip power every couple of years.
Right. That relentless progress in computing power was enabling entirely new military capabilities.
And this connects back to that early vision of networked computers.
It does. Remember J.C.R. Licklider's almost sci-fi-sounding intergalactic computer network memo from the early 60s? His successors at ARPA, people like Ivan Sutherland and Bob Taylor, they ran with it. They pushed forward the development of ARPANET, the precursor to the Internet.
And they foresaw how it would change communication.
Amazingly so. They predicted way back then that men will be able to communicate more effectively through a machine than face-to-face. Think about how much of our lives that describes now.
This networking idea then gets applied directly to warfare with the system of systems concept.
Exactly. That term came from Albert Wohlstetter, a prominent nuclear strategist. The idea was to fuse all these separate technologies, sensors from the electronic fence idea, computers, the ARPANET for communication, new precision weapons like laser-guided bombs, even early drones into one integrated system.
Like the Assault Breaker program.
Assault Breaker was a prime example. It aimed to allow commanders to see deep behind enemy lines, identify moving targets like tank columns, and hit them precisely, quickly. A huge leap from just carpet bombing areas.
And the Soviets noticed this.
Oh, they learned about Assault Breaker, partly through espionage, and they saw it as a genuine military technical revolution. It spurred them to develop their own countermeasures. This whole dynamic led Andrew Marshall, the legendary Pentagon strategist nicknamed Yoda, to coin the phrase revolution in military affairs, or RMA. Recognizing that technology wasn't just improving warfare, it was fundamentally changing its nature.
The digital battlefield wasn't just about sensors and networks, it became virtual too.
Yes, with SimNet. This was the brainchild of Air Force Captain Jack Thorpe, and it was revolutionary. The book calls it the first realization of cyberspace, and get this, the world's first massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMORPG.
An MMORPG for tank battles?
Essentially, yes. Entire tank squadrons, hundreds of soldiers, could log in and train together in these shared virtual environments. They weren't just simple simulators. They had realistic physics, communication systems, even real-world problems simulated like running out of fuel or getting lost.
So like World of Tanks, but for real soldiers decades ago.
Pretty much. And it wasn't just a game. The system got transferred to the Army, and the training simulations they ran before the 1991 Gulf War turned out to be eerily accurate, predicting how the actual battles unfolded. General Streskov himself commented on the parallels.
Training in virtual reality directly impacted real-world success.
Undeniably. But the military's interest in these virtual worlds didn't stop at training. There was Project Reynard. This was a covert effort involving the CIA, NSA, and DARPA to basically spy inside online games like World of Warcraft.
Spying inside? Why?
They feared that these massive online communities with their own economies and communication channels could be used by terrorists or spies. They saw them as potential target-rich communication networks for intelligence gathering. They even created their own avatars to go undercover in the game world.
Wow, so no digital space is really off-limits?
Seems that way. This era also saw Reagan's Star Wars initiative.
SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, announced in '83.
Right. The hugely ambitious plan to build a space-based shield to shoot down Soviet ICBMs, very controversial, technologically fraught, and DARPA was put in charge as the lead agency.
And lasers were a big part of that vision, which brings us to another fascinating origin story.
Charles Townes, the Nobel laureate who invented the laser. He actually confirmed that his inspiration came, in part, from reading a 1926 Russian science fiction novel called The Gagarin Death Ray by Alexei Tolstoy.
Science fiction directly inspiring a Nobel Prize-winning invention.
Incredible, isn't it? The power of imagination.
Lasers had peaceful uses too, demonstrating incredible precision.
Absolutely. Like in 1969, after the Apollo 11 moon landing, the astronauts left special mirrors on the lunar surface. Scientists back on Earth could then bounce a laser beam off those mirrors.
And measure the distance.
Precisely. They measured the distance to the moon accurately to within about an inch. Just an amazing demonstration of the laser's potential.
But DARPA saw the weapon's potential early on.
Of course. Even before SDI, DARPA had classified laser programs running, like one codenamed Eighth Card. They were already exploring directed energy weapons, DUW, because of their incredible speed. A laser beam travels at the speed of light could theoretically hit a target on the moon in under 2 seconds. That speed is incredibly attractive for missile defense. The dual-use nature, always there.
Then the Cold War ends, but new threats emerge. Biological warfare becomes a major concern.
A terrifying one, especially after Soviet defectors like Vladimir Paseknik and Ken Alibek started revealing the true scale and sophistication of the Soviet bioweapons program, Biopreparat.
What did they reveal?
Weaponized anthrax, tularemia, smallpox, but also genetically engineered pathogens, things like antibiotic-resistant bubonic plague, and even more frightening so-called stealth viruses.
Stealth viruses.
Viruses designed to be difficult to detect or to have delayed effects. This confirmed what some experts like Nobel laureate Joshua Lederberg have been warning about for years. He criticized the U.S. government for its blindness to the pace of biological advance, for focusing so heavily on physics and math since World War II, and largely ignoring biology.
A strategic blind spot.
A huge one. The defectors talked about concepts like chimeras, pathogens engineered with genes from different organisms to give them new, dangerous properties, and these stealth viruses that could lie dormant for years, then be synchronously triggered across a population, almost like biological blackmail.
And there were real-world parallels, weren't there, like the SV40 virus?
Right. The controversy over the simian virus 40 found contaminating some early polio vaccines in the 50s and 60s. It raised concerns about how unknown or engineered viruses could spread undetected.
So how did the U.S. prepare for this kind of threat?
One way was through simulations. In June 2001, just before 9/11, there was a high-level war game called Dark Winter.
What did that simulate?
It simulated the National Security Council's response to a fictional, covert smallpox attack starting in Oklahoma City. Former senior officials played the roles.
And the results.
Utter chaos.
Yeah.
The simulation predicted collapsing healthcare systems, mass panic, suspension of civil liberties, even civilians shooting police officers out of fear. It was a stark warning. Interestingly, the scenario included a fictional Iraqi defector claiming Iraq was behind the attack.
These weren't just abstract concerns before 9/11, were they?
No, Vice President Cheney was reportedly very concerned about a biological attack even before 9/11. There were plans to install a sophisticated biological detection system called BASIS from Lawrence Livermore Lab right inside the White House. The threat felt very real at the highest levels.
Then 9/11 happens. What was the situation with biodefense then?
Chaos and uncertainty. David Bray, who was at the CDC's Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response program on 9/11, described the overwhelming confusion. DARPA actually had a program called BioAlert, designed to automatically scan medical records for patterns indicating a bioweapons attack.
But it wasn't ready.
It wasn't advanced enough then. It couldn't have identified sophisticated engineered threats like those chimera viruses the Soviets were supposedly working on. There was a gap.
And Cheney had a personal scare right after 9/11.
Yes, a frightening one. Initial tests for botulinum toxin came back positive in the White House secure facilities. Huge alarm. The all-clear only came when lab mice exposed to the samples were found alive and well, feet down, as the saying goes. A very tense moment.
Meanwhile, Secretary Rumsfeld's focus immediately shifted.
Reportedly, yes. Even on the day of 9/11, discussions turned towards attacking Iraq. Rumsfeld was also very keen on using the post-9/11 environment to accelerate the transformation of the military, leveraging DARPA's system of systems concepts for future wars.
This led to the revival of a controversial DARPA program.
Total Information Awareness, or TIA, headed by John Poindexter, who you might remember from the Iran-Contra scandal.
Right. What was TIA's goal?
Its original project name was Genoa, and the aim was incredibly ambitious: to predict the next man-made cataclysmic event. How? By integrating and analyzing vast amounts of data from classified government databases, looking for patterns, connections.
And it involved collecting data on ordinary citizens.
Yes, that was the really controversial part. A component called ELD, evidence extraction and link discovery, aimed to hoover up as much electronic information about people as possible. Not just terror suspects, but the general American public. Phone records, emails, web searches, credit card receipts, travel records, even library book checkouts. Everything.
That sounds vast. How did people react?
Huge public outcry. Major privacy concerns. Congress got involved, held hearings. The backlash was so strong that TIA was officially shut down, its funding cut.
So it just disappeared.
Well, the name disappeared. But according to insiders quoted in the book, many of its core technologies and concepts didn't vanish. They were transitioned to the intelligence community, likely the NSA, and repurposed under different names. Things like combat zones that see for urban surveillance or biometrically enabled intelligence. The tech lived on.
Shifting gears back to the battlefield, Iraq. IEDs became a massive problem.
A devastating problem. Improvised explosive devices. Relatively simple, cheap bombs causing huge casualties and costing hundreds of millions in countermeasures. General Abizaid, head of Central Command, called for a Manhattan-like project to defeat them. That's how serious it was.
What kind of countermeasures did DARPA work on?
Early efforts involved jammers, like the C-rope system, designed to block the radio signals used to detonate some IEDs. Longer-term ideas included things like radar, trying to develop sensors that could detect the faint chemical vapors from explosives at a distance.
But not all the tech worked, or was even real.
Tragically, no. There was this device called the ADE-651. These handheld bomb detectors, costing up to $60,000 each, were widely sold to and used by Iraqi security forces at choke points.
And they worked?
Not at all. DARPA's own testing lab, CEXC, examined one. Their conclusion: it had no electronic components inside. It was basically an empty plastic case with an antenna. Nothing more than a magic wand, as the book puts it. Completely fraudulent and incredibly dangerous because it gave a false sense of security.
The complexity of Iraq and Afghanistan also highlighted the need to understand the people, not just the technology.
Exactly. Which led to another DARPA-funded initiative, the Human Terrain System, or HTS.
Human terrain? What was that?
The idea was to embed social scientists, anthropologists, sociologists directly with combat brigades on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Why? What was the goal?
The initial pitch was often about hearts and minds, building rapport, understanding local culture to reduce conflict. But significantly, a lot of the funding actually came from JIADO, the Joint IED Defeat Organization. So a key underlying goal was to use cultural understanding to help mitigate IEDs, to figure out the social networks and local dynamics that enabled the insurgency.
The argument being that cultural ignorance was dangerous.
Yes. Montgomery McFate, a key architect of HTS, argued forcefully that cultural ignorance can kill, that U.S. soldiers often lacked the basic cultural understanding needed to build trust or even have simple conversations with locals.
But embedding academics in combat zones, that sounds risky.
Extremely risky, and tragically so. Paula Lloyd, one of the social scientists deployed with HTS in Afghanistan, was horrifically attacked. An Afghan man doused her with flammable liquid and set her on fire. She later died from her injuries.
That's horrific.
And the aftermath was complex, too. Her military bodyguard, Don Ayala, pursued and fatally shot the assailant. It highlighted the intense dangers and ethical complexities of the program.
Did these cultural strategies work on a larger scale, like the oil spot idea?
The oil spot strategy was tried in places like Nakonay, Afghanistan. The idea is you secure a small area, provide services, win over the population, and then slowly expand that secure spot like oil spreading on water. Divide and conquer, essentially.
But the reality on the ground.
Often brutal. Nakonay, where this was implemented, was simultaneously being described by international press as a killing zone. It shows the often vast gap between counterinsurgency theory and the violent reality of war.
Looking ahead now, beyond Iraq and Afghanistan, drone warfare has obviously continued and expanded.
Very much so. President Obama gave a major speech in 2013, actually at Fort McNair, where Project 137 started, trying to frame the legal and ethical boundaries of the ongoing war on terror with a heavy focus on drone strikes. Though critics pointed out that the actual use of drones wasn't really being curtailed, the debate is still very active.
And the drones are getting smaller, more insidious.
There have been reports, sightings even, of insect-sized spy drones, maybe in places like Washington, D.C. or New York. This ties into DARPA's long-standing research in biomimetics mimicking biology.
Like that dragonfly drone from the 70s?
Exactly, the insectothopter. More recently, things like the Black Widow Micro-Air Vehicle, MAV. Tiny drones, designed for surveillance in tight spaces, but also potentially, according to the source, for assassination using micro-explosive bombs. Tiny killer robots.
And this blending of biology and machine goes even further.
Yes, into concepts like biohybrids and nanobiotechnology. Really coupling biological systems directly with machines, leading towards the creation of actual cyborgs, part living creature, part machine. It's blurring fundamental lines. Which brings us to perhaps the ultimate frontier, the brain. Brain wars, as some call it.
And circling back to Alan Macy Dulles.
Right, whose brain injury left him, in his sister's words, like a blank page, a stark reminder of the devastating effects of brain trauma.
But DARPA isn't just studying brain injury, they're trying to intervene directly.
This is where it gets truly mind-bending. DARPA's SubNets program, Systems-Based Neurotechnology for Emerging Therapies. The goal is to treat PTSD, traumatic brain injury, depression, other neuropsychological issues in soldiers.
Ow!
By surgically implanting arrays of electrodes, microchips, deep inside the brain. These implants would wirelessly transmit brain activity data and, crucially, could also receive signals to deliver targeted electrical impulses back into the brain.
To correct abnormal brain patterns.
Essentially, yes. To relieve symptoms. The book describes it starkly as a kind of 21st century electroshock therapy on the go, remote-controlled brain modulation. The potential benefits are clear, but the ethical implications, control, privacy, they're immense.
This interfaces with work on prosthetics, too.
Yes, DARPA has funded incredibly advanced prosthetics, like the Dika arm, nicknamed the Luke arm after Luke Skywalker. It's controlled by nerve impulses.
But these aren't widely available.
No, the engineering cost alone can be upwards of $650,000. Very few veterans actually get them, which leads to a rather unsettling observation from robotics expert Noel Sharkey.
What's his concern?
He suggests that maybe DARPA's primary goal in funding these amazing prosthetics isn't just to help wounded soldiers. Maybe it's also, or even primarily, about developing better hands and arms for robots, to make military robots more capable, perhaps ultimately capable of replacing human soldiers entirely. A provocative thought.
And beyond interfacing with the brain, they're trying to build one.
An artificial brain. Places like Los Alamos National Lab, DARPA scientists are working on simulating complex brain functions, like the primate visual system, modeling how the eye processes information, the long-term goal, sentient machines, cognitive amplification.
Trying to replicate human consciousness.
That seems to be the ultimate aim. It's an unbelievably complex challenge. The human brain has maybe 100 billion neurons with trillions upon trillions of connections. Recreating that, it's monumental.
And alongside building artificial brains, there's research into regeneration, healing the biological brain and body.
Right. Work like that by Doctors David Gardner and Susan Bryant at UC Irvine, studying how salamanders can regenerate entire limbs. They found links between regeneration pathways and cancer pathways.
Suggesting humans might have dormant regenerative abilities.
They suggest humans can regenerate, that the potential is there, perhaps linked to controlling those same pathways that also drive cancer. It's incredibly hopeful for medicine, but again, you can see the obvious military applications, faster healing for soldiers.
But all this ambition, especially around AI and sentient machines, it comes with warnings.
Serious warnings. Stephen Hawking, for instance, famously warned that the development of full artificial intelligence could be humanity's worst mistake in history, that AI could eventually outsmart us, out-invent us, develop weapons we can't comprehend, and potentially escape our control entirely. A very stark counterpoint to the relentless drive for AI.
It's fascinating how science fiction keeps intersecting with this story.
It really is striking. We mentioned Charles Townes and the Garin death ray inspiring the laser.
And it's not just inspiration, the themes resonate inside the Pentagon, too.
Apparently so. The book mentions anecdotes of Pentagon officers having posters of the cigarette-smoking man from the X-Files, or even making baseball caps with Skynet on them, the rogue AI from the Terminator movies.
So they're aware of these fictional warnings.
It seems these themes, AI dominance, government secrecy, unintended consequences, they aren't just dismissed as fantasy. They're part of the conversation, even if humorously sometimes. It makes you think, as the author suggests, that some of the most powerful Pentagon secrets and strategies are hidden in plain sight, reflected in the culture itself.
Like that anecdote about the hot dog stand.
Yeah, the classic story. Soviet analysts poring over spy photos of the Pentagon courtyard, seeing constant foot traffic to this little structure in the middle.
And they concluded.
They mistakenly concluded it must be the disguised entrance to a secret underground missile silo or command center. In reality, it was just a popular hot dog stand. A simple explanation hidden by paranoia and looking for secrets.
So wrapping this up, we've traced DARPA from its birth in that Cold War panic after Sputnik.
Right through shaping nuclear strategy, pioneering the internet and networked warfare, driving stealth technology.
And now pushing into these really profound areas of human-machine integration, AI, neuroscience, even regeneration.
And throughout it all, that persistent chicken and egg problem that Director Recton identified. DARPA has to keep doing this pre-requirement research, constantly anticipating, trying to stay ahead to prevent the next technological surprise. It's a never-ending cycle.
A constant push for dominance through innovation. So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. If this relentless drive for technological superiority keeps blurring the lines between human and machine, between biology and technology, even between reality and simulation, what does it really mean to be well-informed about where warfare is heading?
And maybe even more fundamentally, in a world increasingly shaped by these powerful algorithms, advanced AI, maybe even direct brain interfaces, what does it mean to be human? What does that mean for you?